Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's episode of Talking Mother. It's me, Chapter Z, and so basically the whole idea of this is that it's going to be a series where I discuss perhaps more spoiler-heavy things relating to the Mother games as I play Mother 3, or things that I forgot to mention, or things that are interesting but tangential to gameplay that would have slowed me down. So this episode is going to be focused on some of the details that I skipped over, including the name of the village. Now, we saw the name of the village, and in the English fan translation by Meedee, they render it as Tazmily Village. I personally go with the translation given in Super Smash Bros. Brawl, because I think it's more... It carries across more symbolism, I guess. More not symbolism, but like more of the joke or the language pun that the name carries. So in Smash Bros. Brawl, it's not Tazmily Village. They call it Tatsumairi Village, or Tatsumairi Village, right? Basically, the reason why it's significant that it's called Tatsumairi Village and not Tazmily Village is because there's... Spoiler alert for those who are still watching, who don't know about the game already, or for those who care. One of the core tenets of Mother 3 is that there is basically the deity called the Dark Dragon. And the Dark Dragon, dragon in Japanese is Tatsu, right? So the Dark Dragon is effectively responsible for them, having the Nowhere Island. And the Nowhere Island is basically the dragon's back. The whole point of the game later on is that you have to pull 7 needles from the dragon's back to awaken it from its slumber. And when the dragon's awakened, it'll either destroy the world or recreate the world. And at the point of the end of the game, if you saw my video about gacha games, I alluded to the fact that the world gets destroyed in Mother 3. And the world is imminently ending by the end of Mother 3 because of Porky's sort of influence. He brings industrialization and the concept of money to the Nowhere Islands, and people sort of wreck their own home through, pollution, industrialization, the same things that have kind of ruined our own world. And it was definitely, I believe, supposed to be a political commentary, even if it was supposed to be a subdued one. There's no way you can miss it when you play the game, and you'll see that shortly. Tatsumairi Village is the combination of what I believe are the words Tatsu, which is like dragon, which makes sense because the islands are on the back of a dragon, and the majority of the people on the islands live in Tatsumairi Village. And Smiley, which I assume is supposed to be smiley. So dragon and smiley. Now, the reason that's interesting is because the whole reason why they're on the island, again, this is a major spoiler, and I really don't want anybody who is uninitiated in the game to listen to this before sort of the last couple videos, because it's significant. The reason why they were able to even start over after the original destruction of the world, which again I mentioned in the other video, the people of the island are survivors from the destruction of our world, basically. Like our modern society, because of, basically because of the Anthropocene, how like industrialization raised the amount of carbon output in the atmosphere, and et cetera, and et cetera. I'm not going to go too deep into that, but we basically destroy our own world through greed, through corruption, through pollution, par for the course, really. And those people are the people who managed to board something called the White Ship, which spirited them away and took them to the one remaining safe place in the world after it ended. And that was, the Nowhere Islands. And the Dark Dragon, I guess, became the landmass. I don't remember the story 100%. I'm replaying through it as we speak, you'll recall. The dragon basically became the islands that they would sleep on. The sleeping dragon basically became the island that they would inhabit. And there was a point when the dragon was awake, and they basically had to seal him with the needles because his presence and the human's presence could not... They couldn't abide one another for some reason. They don't really say why in the game, but that the dragon and the humans couldn't be active at the same time. So they seal his back with 7 magical needles and put him into a deep sleep. And the humans who were on the island basically force themselves through hypnotic suggestion, to forget everything that happened in the old world so that they won't have any attachment to the ideas or to the practices that destroyed it. And the only person who remembers anything is Letter, the bell ringer, right? So episode 2, I pointed out Letter as my favorite character, the best character in the game by far. And by the end of the Let's Play, you'll understand why, because he's the one that blows the whistle on everything that nobody else knows because they've willfully forgotten. He's the only one who remembers. He maintains the amnesia by ringing the bell every day to carry on the hypnotic suggestion to forget everything. And and you find out that all of the names of all the characters were things that were invented based on, I believe, based on the jobs that they had, or their function, or their role in the village, which is interesting. His name is Letter. They named him Letter, which basically means leader, I believe, in German. And he mentions that it wasn't because he was especially like leader-like or anything. They chose him as the leader because he was the tallest, and if you look, yeah, he's like 3 or 4 of any other person standing on each other's shoulders. So, yeah, he's definitely tall. Anyhow, I believe that the desire to be willfully ignorant of the evils that destroy the old world, I think, is why they call it Smiley, right? Tatsumairi, like Tatsumairi. Tazmily, dragon smile, okay? So, that's just one detail that I ended up skipping over that I realized I should probably address, the name of the village and what it could signify. The other interesting thing is, again, Shigesato Itoi is very on the nose with a lot of his jokes, and one of the big things that you might have noticed in the past couple episodes is that there's a lot of characters named after fire and fire implements, and I also neglected to go into that. I made jokes in the video titles at some points about, or even in some points in the video, about lighter, flint, and fuel. And I mean, it's interesting to think about what those names could signify. Like, okay, so obviously lighter and fuel, father and son, like, it's interesting how one thing relies on the other to light the flames. Like, the lighter relies on the fuel, and without the fuel, the lighter can't start a fire. The fuel can't start a fire without the lighter. It's just an interesting, they go together. They're father and son. It makes sense. And flint, of course, is the other implement for starting a fire with fuel, which I don't really know. It's interesting that it's a less... Flint is sort of like the less sophisticated version of the lighter, if I recall correctly. Like, you know, back in the day, you would just use like a flint and steel, and you would just create sparks, and then you would use like, you know, some know-how to generate friction and make the spark. Like, you would maintain the spark, and you make a flame, right? Quick addendum, because I completely forgot about this when I was recording the first episode. Another dimension to the whole fire implement symbolism that I completely forgot is that a flint and a steel don't need fuel. They create a spark and you maintain it through basically a combination of like different forms of know-how. Like you keep enough air on it that the flame grows and doesn't get blown out and all stuff. And the big thing is that fuel and lighter are a codependent relationship. You need the lighter to make the fuel sort of useful. You need the fuel in order for the lighter to be able to make a flame at all, right? Whereas with Flint and Lucas, Lucas is kind of like the cast off part of Flint. You can't have fire without light, but Flint don't need no fuel. His kid isn't what's necessary to create the fire. He creates the fire on his own. And here's the thing, another thing that I neglected to mention is that when Hinawa dies, Klaus gets angry. He goes to try and avenge his mother with a butter knife, and he gets killed. Flint goes off to try to find Klaus because nobody knows he's dead yet. You don't find out that he's dead until the very end. or you don't find out that he died until the very end. So Flint goes off to find Klaus, and he leaves Lucas behind. But Flint's basically a flame burning by himself for the entire game. Like, he's just like passion, just like he's not worried about. He may be worried about Lucas, but he's obviously not worried enough that he goes in and checks on him, or he goes and he is with him in his time of need. He goes after Klaus, and he doesn't really come back until the end of the game when he discovers that Klaus is the masked man. He's the one that tells you, hey man, the guy with the mask, that's your brother. That's Klaus. And yeah, it's I mean, there's further symbolism then to Flint's whole relationship with Lucas and Klaus. Anyway, yeah, addendum. Totally forgot that. Enjoy the rest. It's interesting that Flint is kind of like the old-fashioned version of a lighter. And then we get into Lucas and Klaus's names. And this is going to be, at first, okay, but then when I get to Klaus, we're going to, again, venture into the realm of spoilers. So Lucas, of course, if you don't know, Lucas is a name that means light. And so, again, with the symbolism of fire, Lucas's name makes sense, right? He's the son of Flint, and he's in the midst of a village with characters with names like Flint and Lighter and Fuel, and he's the son of Flint, and he is a light. He's the thing that the fire casts off of itself to illuminate, right? And his brother's name is the polar opposite, right? Instead of Lucas, well, not the polar opposite, it's an anagram. Instead of Lucas, it's Klaus. If you know anything about this game, you know that, well, Klaus is his twin brother, and he's very much the opposite of Lucas in personality. He's a little bit more cruel and vindictive. He was perfectly willing to have fun by knocking the Dragos over, even though they were just kind of letting him, and it's all in good fun. And he was the one, spoiler for a couple episodes from now, he's the one who decides to go take revenge on the Dragos that killed Lucas and Klaus's mother, Hinawa, Flint's wife, etc. Village's sweetheart, everybody loved her. Oh, this game is very sad. Really, you shouldn't be listening to this before watching like episode 4 or 5 is probably when that's going to happen. But yeah, Klaus is the one that took vengeance and went after the Dragos with a damn butter knife to try to avenge his dead mother. It's also the reason I hate Bronson. The scene where you find out Hinawa is dead. Bronson does the most boneheaded thing, and Flint goes ballistic, and I cannot blame him. Anyhow, Klaus plays into the symbolism as well because he's like a scrambled or like an inverted version of Lucas. So if Lucas is the light, Klaus, he's not exactly the darkness because he's not the opposite, but he's like different. He's scrambled. He's not the light, and you find out later in the game, again, this is a huge spoiler, that he is the masked man. He is the final boss of the game. And like any other Mother game, the final boss is not a standard boss. You don't beat Klaus by fighting him. You beat Klaus by letting him attack you and basically maintaining your health throughout the fight until Hinawa's spirit intervenes, gets Klaus to wake up, and Klaus kills himself. This game is dark as hell. It seems a little bit lighthearted now, but it'll only get darker as it goes. Anyway, that has been episode 1 of Talking Mother. I've been Chapter Z. I hope you enjoyed this, and I'll try to think of something to do for the next week when this comes around. Hopefully, I'm sure it'll be something interesting for sure, otherwise there just won't be one. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed, and later.